This is Caspian Holt broadcasting on emergency frequency 77.3 megahertz. If you can hear my voice, then somewhere in this broken country a receiver still lives. That alone is something worth holding on to. It began with a flash that had no sound. At 9:17 a.m., the sky over the city turned white in a way I have never seen before. Not lightning, not an explosion. It was as if the sun blinked twice, too bright, too sharp, and then returned to normal. People stepped out of offices thinking it was a transformer blowing. Drivers slowed, confused by the sudden shimmer overhead. Then every car within sight coasted silently. Engines died in unison. Traffic lights went black. Digital billboards froze mid-advertisement and faded. In the studio, the soundboard let out a shriek through the monitors. A rising metallic scream, before every screen in front of me went dark. For 3 seconds there was silence so complete I could hear my own pulse. Then the city exhaled in confusion. Elevators stalled between floors. Trains ground to a halt on open track. I watched from the studio window as a commuter plane descending toward the regional airport dipped too low, corrected too late, and vanished behind a row of buildings. The plume of smoke followed seconds after. Cell phones died in people's hands. Backup generators attempted to kick in. Most of them failed instantly. Some hospital systems flickered to life for less than a minute before collapsing again. Within 10 minutes, gridlock swallowed every major artery of the city. Without signals, intersections became knots of metal. Horns blared until batteries drained and died. We didn't understand it yet. We called it a cascade failure, a cyber attack, a solar flare. We were wrong on all counts except one. It was coordinated. I found this transmitter in a storage locker beneath the station. An old analog ham rig from the 70s. Vacuum tubes, manual dials. It survived because it was never connected to anything modern. I don't know how long it will hold out, but for now it is enough. The first confirmed deaths were not from violence. They were from silence. At Mercy General, ventilators stopped mid-breath. ICU nurses tried to hand pump oxygen for as long as they could. Dialysis machines froze. Electronic medication dispensers would not unlock. Backup batteries had been hardened for storms, not for this. By nightfall, the hospital hallways were lined with sheet-covered forms. Water pressure dropped on the second day. Electric pumps that fed the towers were gone. Faucets coughed and then ran dry. Grocery stores were emptied within hours once people realized trucks were not coming. The planes that had been in the air when it happened fell where gravity demanded. The news helicopters never came because there was no news. On the third night, the stars returned to the city for the first time in decades. They were sharp and merciless. The silence between them felt infinite. Through shortwave chatter from other operators, a pattern emerged. The same flash had been seen across multiple states. High altitude, multiple bursts, a coordinated electromagnetic pulse attack. Every modern microcircuit exposed. No official response followed. No presidential address. No emergency broadcast system. The very system meant to reassure us had been erased. By the end of the first week, dehydration was claiming the elderly. Pharmacies were stripped bare. Insulin spoiled without refrigeration. Oxygen tanks emptied. The first gunshots echoed on day 6. They weren't organized. They were desperate. A man shot another over bottled water in a parking lot that smelled of rotting food. Police radios were silent. Their cruisers were as dead as the rest of the city. Officers tried to patrol on foot, but without communication they were islands. Neighborhoods began blocking their own streets with abandoned vehicles. Makeshift checkpoints appeared. Not to control territory at first, just to keep strangers out. I walked 3 miles to the station each day to keep this frequency alive. Along the way, I passed the same faces growing thinner. I passed a nursing home whose doors had been propped open to air out the smell. By week 2, the looting was no longer frantic. It was systematic. Groups moved with purpose. Hardware stores were stripped for tools. Sporting goods outlets were emptied of ammunition. Those who had prepared quietly before the flash did not speak about it. I am not judging them. I am observing. On day 15, water stopped entirely in my district. People gathered around an ornamental fountain downtown, scooping stagnant water with cooking pots. Turned green within days. Disease followed thirst. Diarrheal illness spread through the shelters. Without sewage pumps, waste backed into basements. The city began to rot from below. And then, on the 21st day, a man named Daniel Rourke stepped into the vacuum. He had been a contractor once. Former National Guard. He gathered 20 armed men and took control of the municipal water treatment plant. They claimed they could manually operate parts of it with scavenged generators. They could partially. They declared themselves the Water Authority. At first, it seemed almost civic. They distributed limited water in exchange for labor, hauling debris, digging latrines, guarding perimeters. But power, once tasted, does not dilute easily. Within a week, Rourke required tribute. Food, ammunition, even jewelry. Those who refused were cut off from the water lines they had patched together with salvaged pumps. Public punishments began quietly. A man accused of siphoning extra water was tied to a streetlight overnight. He did not survive the cold. I reported this reluctantly. My voice trembled that night. I am still reporting it. Hospitals are no longer hospitals. They are buildings where volunteers do what they can with dwindling supplies. I carried a battery-powered flashlight to assist in a surgery performed with kitchen utensils sterilized over a camp stove. The patient was 12. He died at dawn. I did not say his name on air. His mother asked me not to. The city now moves according to Rourke's permission. He controls water, and water is life. He has checkpoints at every major intersection leading to the plant. His men wear mismatched uniforms but carry themselves like soldiers. They call him Commander. 2 days ago, one of his lieutenants visited this station. He said the broadcasts were useful. They maintained order, he claimed. He requested that I read a statement legitimizing their authority as a temporary government. I told him I would consider it. I am considering it still. Because yesterday, they shut off water to 3 blocks after someone criticized them publicly. Children are drinking from puddles again. I didn't repeat the call sign today, not because I forgot, because it feels hollow now. Yesterday, I watched a woman trade her wedding ring for 2 gallons of untreated water. She hesitated before handing it over, turning it once in her fingers like she was memorizing the weight of it. The man on Rourke's checkpoint didn't meet her eyes. He poured the water into her container, capped it, and waved her away. That's what currency looks like now. The city no longer smells like exhaust. It smells like smoke, sweat, and decay. Bodies are being buried in parks because there's no fuel left for cremation and no equipment to dig deep enough graves. Shallow mounds dot the green spaces. Someone put little flags in the ground near the playground downtown. Red ones for children. People don't cry much anymore. Dehydration takes that from you. Rourke expanded fast. He didn't do it with speeches. He did it with pipes. His crews ran jury-rigged water lines to neighborhoods that agreed to cooperate. Those that didn't were left dry. Within days, the holdouts folded. You cannot ideology your way through thirst. Security groups that had started as mutual aid circles were absorbed or crushed. Rourke's men offered structure, meals, and protection. For people who hadn't slept in weeks, it sounded like mercy. He set up a central compound at the old civic center. Barricaded entrances. Sandbags stacked in front of the glass. Sniper nests on the roof. They fly a blue flag with a white drop of water painted in the center. Symbolism matters when everything else is gone. I've been careful with what I say on this frequency. Too much truth gets people killed. Too little turns you into propaganda. Last night I crossed a line. They brought a man to the plaza at dusk. Accused him of stealing antibiotics from a medical cache. Whether it was true doesn't matter. They tied his hands behind his back and forced him to kneel on broken concrete while Rourke spoke about order and sacrifice. No amplification system, just his voice carrying over the crowd. Then one of his enforcers struck the man with a rifle, but until he stopped moving. They left him there as a warning. I reported it. Not with outrage. Not with theatrics. Just facts, delivered flat and steady, the way journalists are trained to do when they don't want their own emotions contaminating the record. An hour later, 2 armed men arrived at the station. They said Commander Rourke was disappointed. They said broadcasts like that encouraged unrest. They also brought a small crate of bottled water and a box of canned food and placed it on the floor beside me. They didn't frame it as a bribe. They framed it as cooperation. I didn't answer right away. They waited. I thought about the woman with the wedding ring. I thought about the 12-year-old on the operating table. I thought about the families listening to this frequency on scavenged radios, hoping for something that sounded like stability. So I agreed to read their statement this morning. Took 40 seconds. I described Rourke's authority as provisional. I said his group was maintaining access to clean water. I urged calm and compliance while longer-term solutions were explored. My voice did not shake. Afterward, they left the supplies. I hate myself for how quickly I opened the water. Medical collapse is accelerating. Without refrigeration, blood banks are useless. Without sterilization, even minor wounds turn septic. There are volunteer clinics operating out of churches and school gyms, but they're overwhelmed. People are dying from things that would have been footnotes a month ago. Asthma attacks, infected blisters, simple dehydration. Every death feels unnecessary. Rumors are moving faster than any vehicle can. There's talk of resistance forming in the industrial district. Former firefighters, utility workers, a few ex-military. They're calling themselves the North Loop Collective. Their leader is a woman named Maribel Reyes. She used to run disaster logistics for the county. They're siphoning fuel from abandoned fleets and salvaging old mechanical pumps. They're trying to build something that doesn't revolve around Rourke. I have not confirmed any of this. Rourke has. His patrols doubled yesterday. Curfews were imposed in 3 zones. Anyone out after dark without authorization is detained. Detained is a flexible word. People are disappearing. Food is now rationed through distribution points controlled by Rourke's people. You line up, show your wrist stamp, receive your portion. The stamps smear when you sweat. Some people have started tattooing the symbol themselves to avoid being turned away. Children stand in line with empty containers taller than they are. I walk past them every morning. I am no longer sure what my role is. I tell myself that keeping this frequency alive matters. That documenting collapse matters. That someone, somewhere, someday will want to know how it really happened. But I also know that my voice now helps stabilize a system built on coercion. That is the compromise. Last night, I received a handwritten note slid under the station door. It said only this: "We're moving soon. If you want out, be ready." No signature. I didn't burn it. I folded it into my pocket and carried it with me all day like a small, dangerous secret. If the North Loop Collective is real, they will have to move fast. Rourke is consolidating power with the efficiency of someone who has done this before or imagined it often. And when systems fall apart, men like him rise because they are willing to do what others still hesitate to consider. Outside, the wind is pushing ash down the avenues in slow gray spirals. Somewhere a building is burning unchecked because there's no water to spare. I'm still here, still speaking, still trying to remember what neutrality used to mean. The first explosion rolled across the city just before dawn. It wasn't the sharp crack of gunfire or the dull thud of a building collapse. It was deeper, deliberate, the kind of sound that rearranges the air in your lungs. I was awake already. Sleep has become a series of brief blackouts between anxieties. When the shockwave rattled the station windows, dust sifted down from the ceiling tiles and coated the console in a fine gray layer. A second blast followed, closer. Then gunfire, sustained, controlled, not the scattered panic we've grown used to. They were moving. From the rooftop, I could see smoke rising from the direction of the Civic Center. The blue flag with the white water drop was still there, but it was partially obscured by flames licking up one side of the barricade. Word spread on foot faster than any broadcast. Runners moved through alleyways shouting that the North Loop Collective had breached the outer perimeter. Someone had sabotaged one of Rourke's generators overnight. Without power, the pumps faltered. Without the pumps, his leverage thinned. People did not hide this time. They watched, not cheering, not intervening, just witnessing. I stayed on the air. I described what I could see. Columns of smoke, figures moving between sandbags, the pop of rifles echoing between concrete walls. I did not name sides. I did not assign righteousness. By mid-morning, the fight had reached the plaza where the public punishments had taken place. I walked closer than I should have. The compound's front entrance was torn open. Burned-out trucks blocked the steps. I saw men I recognized from the checkpoints lying motionless against the curb. And I saw civilians, neighbors, dragging the wounded toward makeshift triage stations set up in the shade of collapsed awnings. This wasn't clean. There were no uniforms, no clear lines. Just people who had decided that water under one man's command was no longer acceptable. The collective moved with coordination. They flanked from the service tunnels beneath the Civic Center. Tunnels only someone familiar with municipal blueprints would know how to navigate. Maribel Reyes emerged just after noon. I recognized her from descriptions. Short hair pulled back tight, grease smeared across one cheek, carrying a rifle but moving like someone who preferred logistics to combat. She wasn't shouting. She was directing. Rourke's men fought hard. Desperation makes good soldiers. But by late afternoon, the firing thinned. A white cloth appeared from one of the upper windows. It hung there, fluttering uncertainly. Rourke was dragged into the plaza at sunset. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, hands bound behind his back with heavy cable ties. His expression wasn't rage. It was calculation even then. The crowd gathered again. This time, the man kneeling was the one who had once ordered others to do so. Maribel didn't execute him. She called for a tribunal. Not a performance. Not a spectacle. A circle formed in the center of the plaza. Residents, medics, former security volunteers, even two of Rourke's own men who had surrendered. They spoke in turns. Some demanded immediate execution. They listed the dead, the punishments, the hoarded supplies. Others argued that killing him would only prove that power changes hands but methods remain. I stood at the edge of that circle and felt something heavier than fear. Responsibility. They asked me to speak. I didn't want to. My compromise was known. The broadcast I had read on Rourke's behalf had not gone unnoticed. Some saw me as complicit. Others said I had kept information flowing when it mattered. I stepped forward anyway. I did not absolve him. I recounted the facts, the tribute system, the water shutoffs, the public beatings, the deaths from withheld supplies. Then I said something I hadn't planned. I said that if we killed him in anger, we would teach ourselves that authority is resolved by force alone. That the first system to rise after collapse would be indistinguishable from the one we just tore down. Silence followed. The decision was not unanimous. It was barely a majority. Rourke was sentenced to labor under guard, no authority, no weapon, no voice in governance. He would help rebuild the very infrastructure he had once controlled. If he refused, exile beyond the perimeter. He didn't speak when they cut him loose from the cable ties and fastened shackles instead. The blue flag was taken down that night. Not burned. Folded. The generators at the water plant were repaired with parts scavenged from industrial warehouses. Engineers who had stayed quiet under Rourke stepped forward once his grip loosened. Knowledge resurfaced from hiding. Water began flowing again. Not constantly, not clean enough, but shared. The collective reorganized distribution points. No more tribute. Work rotations instead. Transparent accounting of supplies, written on boards in charcoal for anyone to read. Casualties were heavy. 37 confirmed dead from the assault. Dozens more injured. Every victory in a collapsed world comes with arithmetic that never balances. 3 days ago, we managed something I had almost stopped hoping for. We reached another region. A signal answered ours from hundreds of miles away. A low-powered analog transmitter, same as this one. Their voice cracked with static, but it was human. They had survived too. Different warlords, different struggles. Same flash in the sky. We're coordinating now, exchanging maps, repair techniques, crop reports. The slow, fragile communication. But it exists. A small hydroelectric station north of here may be salvageable. If we can replace damaged transformers with predigital backups from an old museum facility, limited power might return to parts of the grid. Not the old grid. Something smaller, decentralized, harder to kill with a single pulse. Children are helping plant in empty parking lots where asphalt has been torn up to expose soil. Someone painted over the water drop flag and replaced it with a simple image of interlocked hands. Hospitals are still shadows of what they were. We lose people we shouldn't. We bury them with names spoken aloud so they don't dissolve into statistics. Civilization did not vanish in a flash. It thinned. It cracked along the lines we ignored for too long. Dependency, centralization, complacency. We built a world so efficient that when it failed completely. Now we are building something slower, more deliberate. Trust is scarce, but it is not extinct. I look out at a skyline still scarred by fire and neglect. No neon, no hum of traffic, just the quiet labor of people relearning how to live without assuming tomorrow will function automatically. We are not going back to what we were. Even if power returns in fragments, even if networks stitch themselves together again, we have seen how quickly the illusion of permanence dissolves. That knowledge will not fade. It shouldn't. If you are hearing this from somewhere beyond this city, know that you are not alone in the dark. Others are rebuilding imperfectly, stubbornly. Humanity did not end with the pulse. Staggered. Fought itself. It made terrible choices. And then, in some places, it chose restraint. I don't know what this country will look like in a year. I don't know if these fragile lines of communication will hold. But tonight, water flows without tribute. Tonight, a man who once ruled by fear digs trenches beside the people he tried to command. Tonight, children are asleep with full cups beside their beds. That is not victory, but it is survival. The nights are quieter now. Not peaceful, just quieter. The gunfire that once echoed between buildings has faded into the distance, replaced by the low scrape of shovels and soil and the soft clatter of tools being passed hand to hand. You can tell how a city is healing by the sounds it makes. Right now, ours sounds tired but determined. Rourke works on a debris crew near the river. They keep him in sight at all times. 2 volunteers rotate watch duty. He doesn't argue. He doesn't speak unless spoken to. He lifts broken concrete and rusted rebar alongside people who once waited in his water lines. His shoulders are already slumped from labor he never intended to do himself. Some stare at him with hate. Some ignore him completely. Both feel appropriate. Maribel Reyes refuses the word leader. She calls herself a coordinator. She spends most of her time hunched over handwritten charts, tracking calories, clean water output, medical supplies, and manpower. Her hands are permanently stained with charcoal from the boards she updates 3 times a day. Power is now distributed through responsibility instead of fear. It's slower. It's messier. It's human. We established rotating neighborhood councils. Not elections, there's no paper to spare, but open assemblies where anyone can speak. Arguments break out. Accusations surface. Old grievances bleed into new decisions. That's democracy in its rawest form. The medical teams have stabilized into something resembling a system. Former EMTs train volunteers. Herbalists work beside retired surgeons. They trade knowledge, argue over dosages, improvise sterilization techniques with pressure cookers and solar heat. Every success feels provisional. Infections still take people. A man died yesterday from a tooth abscess that spread to his bloodstream. He would have walked out of an urgent care clinic a month ago with antibiotics and a warning to floss. Now his family dug his grave behind a library. We restored limited radio contact with 3 more regions this week. They tell similar stories. Flash in the sky, silence, then fragmentation. Some places fared worse. Entire towns burned when propane lines ruptured without emergency shutoffs. Others avoided warlords but collapsed under starvation. A few rural areas adapted faster, less dependent on centralized systems. No one escaped unscarred. The hydro station project is moving forward. The slow, careful work. Every component is inspected by hand. No integrated circuits. No automated controls. Just mechanical governors and analog meters salvaged from a defunct training facility. If it works, we might power a clinic, a water purification line, and this station. Not everything, just enough. Yesterday, a courier arrived on a bicycle with a canvas pack full of handwritten letters from communities along the eastern corridor. People describing crop yields, asking about medical supplies, offering seeds. One letter was from a teacher who has turned a burned-out strip mall into a classroom. She wrote about children practicing arithmetic with chalk on shattered tiles. Another was from a former software engineer who now repairs windmill gearboxes with scrap metal and stubbornness. They are not heroes. They are adapting. That distinction matters. I've been asked whether I'll leave the station once limited power returns. I don't know. This microphone has become a witness. It carries stories between places that can no longer assume connection. There's weight in that. There's also guilt. I still think about the broadcast I read for Rourke. People tell me it bought time, that it prevented immediate bloodshed, that without it, the assault might have come sooner and cost more lives. Maybe, but compromise leaves residue. It sticks to you. At night, I replay his words in my head. Order, sacrifice, temporary authority. They sounded reasonable when everything was falling apart. That's how these things always begin. Food distribution is improving. Community kitchens operate in shifts. Someone figured out how to rig a grain mill from bicycle parts. Bread exists again, dense and smoky, but real. We mark days by meals now. A group of teenagers cleared an old playground and planted beans where the swing set used to be. They painted murals on nearby walls, rivers, trees, hands passing tools. They asked me to broadcast their names so people would know who made them. I did. They beamed like they'd been given medals. We received confirmation this morning that a regional relay network is forming. A chain of low-power transmitters spaced across counties, all analog, all hardened as best we can manage. Information will travel again. Not instantly, not effortlessly, but deliberately. There's talk of a larger gathering in the spring. Representatives from surviving enclaves meeting in person, comparing systems, negotiating shared standards for water rights and transit corridors. No flags, no titles, just people. I'm cautious about hope. Hope without structure is how we ended up with men like Rourke. But cautious optimism, anchored in work and accountability, feels different. I walk through the city every evening after broadcasts. I see gardens growing where parking meters once stood. I see neighbors sharing tools instead of guarding them. I also see scars, burned facades, boarded windows, the empty eyes of those who lost too much to rebuild easily. Civilization isn't a skyline. It's agreement. It's the decision, repeated daily, to care for someone who cannot repay you immediately. We forgot that when everything was automated. We remember it now. If you're listening from somewhere still in chaos, know this: the collapse does not move in a straight line. There will be days when it feels like everything is slipping backward. There will be nights when you question every compromise you've made. Stay with the work. Protect your medics. Share your water. Write things down. History is being rebuilt by hand. I'll stay on this frequency as long as the transmitter holds. And when it finally goes silent, I hope there are others ready to carry the signal forward. For tonight, I'm here, still breathing, still speaking, still trying to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The hydro station came online for 11 minutes. That's all we got the first time. 11 minutes of uneven current pulsing through cables that hadn't carried power in weeks. Enough to light 3 rooms in the clinic, enough to run a sterilizer cycle, enough to make people cry when the overhead bulbs flickered alive like they were remembering what they were built for. Then one of the refurbished governors overheated and seized. Nobody shouted. Nobody blamed anyone. They shut it down manually, logged the failure on a chalkboard, and started disassembling the unit piece by piece while the light faded back out. 11 minutes still mattered. A woman gave birth during that window under real illumination instead of headlamps and candles. The baby's lungs filled properly. The doctor said later that the timing probably saved them both. That's how progress works now. Not in leaps. In narrow windows you have to be ready to use. Rourke collapsed on the debris crew yesterday. Heat exhaustion. Dehydration. The medic who treated him had lost a sister during the water shutoffs. She stabilized him anyway. For fluids from a hand-pumped bag. Shade. Monitoring. No speeches. Just care. He woke up confused, tried to sit, was told firmly not to. He nodded and closed his eyes. Some people wanted him left where he fell. Others argued that letting him die would be easier, not better. He's back on light duty today, sorting scrap metal. I don't know what accountability looks like anymore. I only know that we're inventing it in real time. We recovered 2 more generators from an abandoned municipal warehouse. Both predigital. Heavy as sin. It took 30 people and a sled made from a door to move the first one. They sang while they pulled. Not loudly, just enough to keep rhythm. Maribel spends her nights drafting contingency maps by lantern light. Evacuation corridors. Water fallback plans. Seed distribution routes if blight hits the community plots. She sleeps in 20-minute increments on a cot beside the supply ledger. Someone asked her when she plans to rest. She said rest is a luxury item. The resistance networks are dissolving into civic structures now. What began as armed coordination is turning into committees, work rotations, and shared maintenance schedules. Weapons are being checked into communal lockers except for perimeter watch. It's awkward. Some people don't trust it. Trauma doesn't evaporate because the shooting stops. There are still fights over food portions. Still theft. Still nights when someone screams from a nightmare and wakes half a shelter. But the punishments are different. No kneeling in public squares. No spectacle. Disputes go to circles. Restitution is favored over exile. People are learning, slowly, that fear is an inefficient organizing principle. We heard from a farming collective 2 counties over that managed to restart an old grain silo using belt drives and tractor parts. They're offering flour in exchange for antibiotics and spare tubing. Barter routes are forming. Actual routes. Bicycles with panniers. Handcarts. Convoys protected not by authority but by mutual dependence. A former traffic engineer is redesigning intersections with painted stones and human signals. Kids volunteer as runners. They take it seriously. Little vests made from cut-up tarps, arms outstretched, stopping foot traffic so water carriers can pass. They argue over who gets which corner. They argue like children who expect a future. I broadcast those moments, not to romanticize them, to remind people what still exists. We held the first regional council via relay yesterday. 6 communities patched together through staggered transmissions. Voices fading in and out, names repeated for clarity, decisions written down twice in case one side lost contact. They discussed seed sharing protocols, medical triage standards, how to prevent the next Rourke. No one mentioned politics. They talked about toilets, about waste management, about how many calories a person actually needs when they're doing physical labor all day. Civilization is quieter than it looks on television. It sounds like pencils on paper and boots on gravel. The station nearly went dark this morning when one of the vacuum tubes cracked. We had 1 spare left in a padded crate from the archives. I installed it myself with shaking hands. If this transmitter fails, someone else will have to carry the signal. I'm trying to teach 2 teenagers how to tune it manually. They learn fast. Everyone does now. The dead are being remembered properly. Names carved into scavenged wood. Small markers placed where families can visit. No mass graves anymore unless absolutely necessary. Ritual matters. Closure matters. Even in collapse. Especially in collapse. I walked past the plaza tonight. The spot where Rourke once staged his warnings has been turned into a distribution hub. Chalk arrows on the pavement guide foot traffic. Someone planted marigolds in broken buckets along the perimeter. They're blooming despite everything. I stood there for a long time. I thought about how thin the line is between order and abuse. How easily people accept cruelty when it arrives wearing the costume of necessity. We don't get to pretend we're immune to that anymore. That lesson came at a price. If you're listening from somewhere still fractured, here's what I can offer. Build redundancy. Share knowledge before you hoard tools. Protect the ones who heal. And don't let any single person become indispensable. That's where it always goes wrong. I'll be back on this frequency after the evening supply audit. The hydro team thinks they can get 20 minutes next time. 20 minutes is a lifetime now. We got 23 minutes. Enough time to run the autoclave twice, charge half a dozen hand radios, and bring the refrigeration unit in the clinic down to a temperature that bought insulin another week of life. People stood in the hallway watching the needle on the analog meter climb like it was a religious experience. Then we shut it down on purpose. Controlled shutdown. That might be the most important phrase we've learned. Nobody wants another cascade. The hydro crew logged every vibration, every fluctuation. They're building a profile of the system by hand, listening to the machinery the way doctors listen to lungs. The third run is scheduled for tomorrow. Rourke asked to speak with Maribel this afternoon. Not to negotiate, to apologize. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't redemptive. He said he thought he was preventing chaos. He said once he had control of the water, he didn't see a way to give it back without everything falling apart. Maribel listened, didn't interrupt. When he finished, she told him that fear makes people efficient but brittle. That systems built on coercion always fracture eventually. That he could spend the rest of his life trying to repair what he'd broken, and it still wouldn't undo the deaths. He nodded. He asked what else he could do. She handed him a shovel. Somewhere between the second generator test and the evening council, a boy came to the station with a stack of drawings. He couldn't have been more than 9. He laid them out carefully on the floor. Crayon sketches of windmills, gardens, bridges with people walking across them holding hands. He said his class wanted me to tell everyone they were building the quiet city. I promised I would. So here it is, broadcast as requested. They are building the quiet city, where things work slowly and loudly enough that you notice when they stop. Where nobody is invisible just because they're not profitable. Where water isn't owned. I don't know if they'll succeed, but they're trying. We made first contact today with a medical cooperative 300 miles south. They've converted an old textile factory into a sterile ward using steam lines and gravity-fed sinks. They're sending 2 nurses north on bicycles with panniers full of sutures and antibiotics scavenged from veterinary supplies. They'll arrive in 5 days if the roads stay passable. In exchange, we're sending seeds and mechanical parts. This is what trade looks like now. I spent part of the afternoon walking with a former city planner who now coordinates shelter placements. He carries maps rolled into a PVC tube and stops every few blocks to update them with pencil marks. He pointed out how neighborhoods that used to be divided by income are blending out of necessity. How mixed-use spaces are forming organically, clinics next to kitchens, classrooms beside tool libraries. He said something that stuck with me. He said infrastructure isn't concrete and steel. It's trust made visible. Night watch rotations are posted on the old courthouse doors. People sign up for 2-hour shifts. No one is paid. Everyone eats. We lost an elderly man during the evening meal to a stroke. They tried to help him, but there's only so much you can do without imaging equipment or pharmaceuticals. His granddaughter held his hand while he went. She asked me later if I would say his name on the air. So here it is. Arthur Bell. He taught high school chemistry for 34 years. He liked peach pie. He mattered. I'm learning that broadcasting now is less about information and more about memory. About making sure people don't disappear quietly. The regional relay network is stabilizing. We're scheduling daily windows where each node transmits in sequence. It takes hours to pass a message across states. Sometimes it takes days. Nobody complains. Speed is a relic. There are still armed groups outside the cooperative zones. Some are just trying to protect their own. Others are experimenting with control the way Rourke did, smaller scale, quieter. We share what we've learned. Water monopolies fail. Transparency slows abuse. No one is beyond accountability. Some listen, some don't. We can't save every place. That's the hardest truth. I walked past the river this evening. Someone had repaired a footbridge with scavenged planks and bicycle cables. Swayed, but it held. A woman was teaching 2 kids how to fish with handmade lines. They caught nothing, laughed anyway. That sound felt radical. I thought about the world before the flash, about how many of us lived inside systems we barely understood, trusting invisible networks to hold everything together. Those networks are gone. What remains is us. Hands, voices, choices. Tomorrow, the hydro team will try for 30 minutes. 30 minutes means we can run the water purifier long enough to fill the cisterns. It means the clinic can sterilize a week's worth of instruments. It means another narrow window where life has a little more room to breathe. I'll be here to tell you how it goes. Until then, take care of each other. The quiet city doesn't build itself. We reached 38 minutes. The purifier ran the entire cycle this time. The cisterns filled to a level we haven't seen since before the flash. People lined up with containers, not frantic anymore, just patient, passing buckets forward, helping each other cap lids. Someone rang a bicycle bell when the meter crossed the halfway mark. It wasn't organized. It just happened. The clinic sterilized every instrument they had. They powered a single refrigerator long enough to stabilize blood plasma. A nurse stood in front of it afterward with her forehead pressed to the metal door like she was thanking it personally. That afternoon, a small convoy arrived from the south. 3 bicycles, 1 handcart, 2 nurses and a retired veterinarian named Saul who had volunteered to guide them through a stretch of road known for opportunistic ambushes. They brought sutures, antibiotics, gauze, and something else that mattered just as much. They brought stories. They told us about a town that converted a bowling alley into a seed bank, about a coastal community using tide-driven turbines built from scrap aluminum, about a group of librarians who are archiving survival techniques in handwritten ledgers because nobody trusts digital storage anymore. Humanity is reappearing in fragments. We stitch those fragments together with radio waves and stubbornness. Rourke has been keeping his head down. He works, eats his portion, sleeps in a supervised shelter like everyone else. Sometimes I catch him watching the kids at the distribution hub. I don't know what he sees when he looks at them. I don't ask. The council debated long-term governance last night. Not constitutions. Not elections. They talked about rotational stewardship. About term limits measured in seasons instead of years. About separating water management from security, medicine from logistics, education from enforcement. They are designing systems that assume people will fail. That's the difference. Someone brought up the idea of restoring limited digital tech once parts become available. The room went quiet. Finally, an older woman who had run payroll for a manufacturing plant said she didn't want to rebuild anything that could disappear again in a single invisible blast. She said she'd rather teach kids how to read pressure gauges and fix pumps with wrenches. The motion carried. We'll use computers when we can, but we won't depend on them. I spent part of today helping relocate a shelter away from a flood-prone underpass. We moved mattresses, cooking pots, handwritten schedules. A man with one arm organized traffic with surprising authority. People listened. Authority is changing shape. There was an incident on the western perimeter last night. A small armed group tried to seize a food cache. They were turned away without shots fired. The watch team formed a line, unarmed except for batons, and refused to move. The group left after an hour of shouting. It won't always go that way. We know that. But every conflict resolved without blood feels like a rehearsal for a better future. I received another bundle of letters today. One was from a teenager who said she listens to this frequency while she studies by candlelight and pretends it's a podcast from the old world. She asked what my favorite book used to be. It was a collection of essays about infrastructure. I told her that. Another letter was from a man in a mountain town who had just become a father. He said the flash happened while his wife was in labor. They delivered the baby by lantern light with guidance shouted through a door by a retired midwife. He wanted me to tell everyone that his daughter's name is Eliza. So here it is. Eliza exists. That matters. The relay network is expanding again. A node in the Midwest managed to repair a rotary transmitter and extend range by nearly 50 miles. They're teaching others how to replicate the design with scavenged parts. We're building a web. Not fast, not sleek, but resilient. I walked past the Civic Center this evening. The sandbags are gone. The broken glass has been swept into piles for reuse. Someone hung a hand-painted banner over the entrance. It says simply, "Work in progress." I stood there and tried to remember the last time a building felt honest. People are tired. People are grieving. People are also teaching each other how to bake with wild yeast and how to splint a fracture with cardboard and cloth. Civilization is reassembling itself out of practical kindness. Tomorrow we attempt 45 minutes on the hydro system. 45 minutes means we can power the schoolroom long enough for a full morning of lessons. The kids already made a schedule. They argued over who gets to erase the chalkboard. I'll be back on the air after the test. If you're listening from somewhere still held together by duct tape and hope, keep going. You don't need permission to rebuild. You just need people. We held 46 minutes. Not because everything went perfectly, because when the second governor started vibrating out of tolerance, 3 people were already moving before the needle crossed the red mark. They throttled flow manually, bled off pressure, and stabilized the bearing with a shim cut from a soup can. It wasn't elegant. It worked. The clinic ran lights in every treatment room. The purifier filled all 3 cisterns. The schoolroom had power long enough for 12 children to sit at real desks and practice handwriting with sharpened pencils instead of charcoal. A boy raised his hand to ask if electricity meant things were going back to normal. The teacher told him no. She told him it meant they were building something new. He nodded like that made sense. We lost 2 people overnight to infection. One was a woman who had stepped on a nail while clearing rubble. Without tetanus vaccine, it spread fast. The other was a man with pneumonia who simply ran out of oxygen. Progress does not cancel grief. It exists beside it. Maribel authorized the first long-range trade run this morning. For bicycles, 1 cart, and an escort of volunteers carrying radios and flare guns. They're headed toward the farming collective with seeds and tubing. They'll return with grain if nothing goes wrong. If something does go wrong, they'll adapt. That's become the refrain. Rourke asked to join the run. Maribel said no. Not as punishment, as policy. Former enforcers don't travel with supplies. Rules matter now. I sat in on a mediation circle today. 2 families arguing over a generator outlet. Voices raised, accusations flying. A 3rd person facilitated, reminding them of the maintenance schedule, the clinic's needs, the cooling requirements for insulin. Eventually they compromised. The outlet will rotate. Nobody stormed off. I broadcasted the outcome, not because it was dramatic, because it was boring. Boring is the sound of stability returning. We've started teaching basic systems literacy in the evenings. How water moves through pipes. How calories convert to labor. How waste cycles back into soil. People who used to write code are learning compost ratios. People who used to manage spreadsheets are learning to set broken bones. No one complains. The regional council sent a consolidated update this afternoon. Several enclaves are experimenting with sail-assisted river transport. One has restarted a paper mill using steam pressure and hand-fed pulp. Another has organized a traveling medical caravan powered by draft animals. No drones, no satellites, just wheels and wind and stubborn people. I walked with Saul, the retired veterinarian, along the riverbank. He pointed out edible plants I'd passed 100 times without noticing. He said most civilizations don't fall because they run out of technology. They fall because they forget how to feed themselves. We're remembering, slowly. Someone found an old printing press in a community college basement. It still works. They printed our first local bulletin this evening. Crop updates, clinic hours, watch rotations, and a column called Things We Learned This Week. The top entry, Don't Overload the Governors. Second entry, Children Learn Faster Than Adults. Third entry, Kindness Scales. A woman stopped me in the street and asked if I was tired. I told her yes. She handed me a cup of broth and said then I should drink this. I did. The relay brought news from a city farther west that had executed its warlord publicly. The message was brief. Casualties high. Infrastructure damaged beyond quick repair. Nobody here celebrated. Nobody judged. We just added their situation to the growing map of outcomes. Every community is choosing its own way through this. Some paths leave deeper scars. The quiet city is taking shape. Not as a place, as a practice. People are marking time by sun position and shared meals. They're inventing ceremonies for things that used to be automatic: power restoration, first harvest, a child learning to read. I watched a group of teenagers repaint the banner over the Civic Center tonight. They added a second line beneath work in progress. It reads, "So are we. Tomorrow the hydro team will attempt a full hour. An hour means refrigeration through the night. It means we can preserve meat for the first time since the collapse. It means fewer funerals next week. I'll be here to tell you whether the bearings hold. And if you're listening somewhere with your own fragile systems and hard choices, remember this. You don't rebuild civilization with declarations. You rebuild it with maintenance. I'm staying on the frequency, still carrying the signal, still believing in boring miracles. We made the hour. 63 minutes, actually. Long enough to keep the refrigeration units running through the night and still have reserve to power the oxygen concentrator in the clinic. Long enough for a butcher to safely process a goat donated by a family on the North Ridge. Long enough for parents to tuck their children in under steady light instead of lantern glow. People didn't cheer this time. They just nodded to each other and went back to work. That's how you know something is becoming normal. The hydro crew is exhausted. Grease-streaked faces, cracked knuckles, eyes that close whenever they stop moving. They take turns sleeping on mats near the turbines so someone is always there if the pitch changes. Machines have voices. You learn to listen. The first printed bulletins went out this morning. Runners carried stacks to shelters and distribution hubs. I watched people read them slowly, tracing lines with their fingers like they were afraid the words might drift away. A woman circled the clinic hours 3 times. She folded the page carefully and tucked it into her coat. We held a remembrance gathering at the riverbank this afternoon. No speeches, just names. Each person stepped forward and said one. Arthur Bell. The woman with the nail wound. The man with pneumonia. 37 from the assault. Children spoke too. They said names of grandparents, neighbors, a teacher who had helped them spell their own. When it was over, stones were placed in a line along the water. No one told anyone else what to do. It happened organically. Rourke stood at the back. He didn't offer a name. I don't know what that means. The trade convoy returned earlier than expected. Grain, dried beans, and something precious. A crate of glass jars. Preservation changes everything. We're planning a canning day next week. People are already organizing teams, washing, chopping, boiling, labeling with pencil and tape. The word winter is being said more often now. Not with panic, with calculation. The regional council circulated a draft framework tonight. Not laws, agreements, principles for intercommunity cooperation, shared water access, medical neutrality, open transit corridors for food. They're trying to codify lessons learned in blood. It feels strange to hear phrases like non-combatant status for clinicians spoken into a static-filled transmitter. But here we are. Maribel announced she'll step down from coordination after the next rotation cycle. She said concentrated responsibility is dangerous, even when intentions are good. She's training 2 replacements and then moving to infrastructure planning. People argued. She didn't bend. Leadership now is something you hand off deliberately. I I spent the evening teaching the teenagers how to document broadcasts in a ledger. Date, time, content summary. They write in neat block letters, serious about it. Archives matter. If we forget, we repeat. Someone asked me today what I'll do when this frequency isn't needed anymore. I told them I don't think it ever stops being needed. Voices are how we remember we're not alone. There was a small fire in a warehouse near the rail spur tonight. It spread fast through old insulation. Volunteer brigades formed immediately, bucket lines pulling water from the cisterns, people rotating in and out until it was contained. We lost some supplies. We didn't lose the building. No one died. That counts as a success now. I walked home through streets lit by a handful of salvaged lamps. Shadows moved slowly across walls painted with schedules and maps. Somewhere someone was practicing violin on an instrument rest-rung with fishing line. It sounded fragile. It sounded stubborn. The hour of power will become two eventually, or it won't. We're planning for both outcomes. Seeds are in the ground. Knowledge is being shared. Children are learning not just letters, but load limits and water chemistry. Civilization isn't returning. It's evolving. I think about the Flash sometimes. About how quickly the old world went quiet. About how much of our confidence had been built on invisible systems we never thanked. Now every bolt tightened feels personal. Every cup of clean water feels earned. If you're listening from somewhere still finding its footing, take heart in small victories. A working pump, a settled dispute, a child laughing over nothing. They add up. I'll keep transmitting as long as this rig holds. And when it doesn't, I hope someone else is ready to take the mic. For now, this is Caspian Holt. Still here. Still counting minutes. Still believing that what we choose after collapse matters more than what we lost. The second hour came quietly. No announcement. No countdown. Just a steady hum through the conduits and the soft click of relays engaging in sequence. Someone marked the time on the chalkboard in the turbine room with a piece of brick. 2 hours and 11 minutes before the vibration profile shifted and we eased back to baseline. We didn't push it. We've learned restraint. That window was enough to restore contact with 3 additional relay nodes. One in the plains, one near a mountain reservoir, and one on the edge of a coastal flood zone. Each voice carried its own version of survival. Each community had made different compromises, some harsher than ours, some gentler, none untouched. The coastal group had rebuilt part of a desalination plant using mechanical valves and gravity feed. They offered schematics in exchange for crop data. The Plains node reported organized grain cooperatives and rotating armed escorts to keep transport corridors open. The mountain reservoir enclave had restored a small turbine system and were experimenting with wooden pressure gates. Knowledge is moving faster than supplies. That may save us. We held the first multi-region coordination session yesterday evening. 6 transmitters staggered across hundreds of miles, passing information in loops like runners in an old relay race. They spoke about transit corridors, disease surveillance, and how to prevent the rise of new water barons. Everyone had the same question, phrased differently. How do we stop this from happening again? There is no satisfying answer. You don't EMP-proof human nature. You design systems that don't collapse when someone exploits them. That's what they're trying to do now. Rourke finished clearing a collapsed overpass this morning. He worked without supervision for the first time. Nobody interfered. Nobody thanked him. He stopped afterward and asked one of the teenagers how the hydro gauges were holding. She told him they were within tolerance. He nodded like that meant something important. Probably does. The underground survival networks that formed during the worst weeks are surfacing. Cache locations are being disclosed. Hoarded medical supplies are entering circulation. People who once hid are stepping forward, embarrassed, relieved, or both. We don't shame them. We inventory. 2 nights ago, Maribel brought me into a quiet room behind the clinic. She showed me a map, not of our city, of the region. Colored pins marked communities we've contacted. Thread-connected trade routes. Pencil notes filled margins with crop yields, generator capacities, and outbreak histories. She told me they're preparing to formalize a regional charter. Not a government. Compact. Mutual aid. Shared standards. Rotating oversight committees drawn from multiple enclaves so no single area can dominate. They're calling it the Corridor Agreement. It's fragile. It depends entirely on trust and verification. But it exists. The hydro station now runs in 3 scheduled blocks daily. Enough to refrigerate food, sterilize equipment, pump water, and maintain this transmitter. The rest of the time we conserve. Children are learning to read analog meters before they learn cursive. Someone carved a phrase into the wooden railing near the turbine intake. Nothing essential should belong to one person. No one erased it. Medical outcomes are improving. Not dramatically, incrementally. Fewer wound infections. Fewer dehydration cases. More births surviving the first critical hours. A midwife told me today that she finally slept 4 consecutive hours. She looked like she'd been given a gift. We received confirmation this afternoon that a regional communications backbone is being assembled using hardened analog repeaters every 50 miles. It will take months, maybe longer, but soon, messages won't have to hop community to community. Soon, we'll be able to speak across states again. Not instantly, but reliably. I walked the perimeter at sunset, past gardens growing in broken median strips, past classrooms held in parking garages, past a group of people rebuilding a bus into a mobile clinic. There was laughter, not loud, careful, like everyone is afraid it might attract something. I stopped by the plaza. The marigolds are taller now. The chalk arrows have faded. Someone replaced them with painted stones. I stood there thinking about the outline of this disaster. The flash, the silence, the scramble, the warlord, the resistance, the choice not to become what we overthrew. Civilization didn't come back. We met it halfway. If you're listening and wondering when it starts to feel real again, I don't think it ever does. You just wake up one morning and realize you're planning 3 weeks ahead instead of 3 hours. That's how you know the collapse has stopped accelerating. We are not healed, but we are coordinated. And coordination in a broken world is everything. I'll stay on frequency. One more part after this. There are still things you need to hear. The Corridor Agreement was signed without ink. 6 communities transmitted their assent within a 24-hour window, each reading the same principles into their respective frequencies so they would exist in record, in memory, and in redundancy. Mutual water access, medical neutrality, shared transit corridors, rotational oversight drawn from outside any single enclave, no permanent executive authority, no private control of essential infrastructure. The words aren't sacred. The repetition is. We now have a predictable power schedule. 3 2-hour windows spaced across the day. It's enough to keep refrigeration stable, maintain water purification, and run limited workshop tools for fabrication. The hydro team has begun training apprentices from neighboring regions. Knowledge is no longer hoarded as leverage. It's taught as insurance. The first interregional delegation arrived on foot 5 days ago. 12 people carrying ledgers, tools, and handwritten crop projections. They walked nearly 80 miles along what used to be a state highway, sleeping in culverts and abandoned diners, guided by relay updates passed ahead of them. When they entered the city, no one saluted. No one knelt. They were welcomed with bread and a seat at the table. We held the council session in the old Civic Center auditorium. The glass has been replaced with salvaged panels. The stage still bears scorch marks from the assault months ago. They left them visible. A reminder. Each community presented its data. Crop yields, infection rates, generator maintenance logs, dispute resolutions. They compared failures openly. A grain blight that wiped out an entire plot in the plains. A cholera scare near the reservoir that was contained only because someone had kept meticulous sanitation records. No one pretended competence they didn't have. That might be the most radical change of all. Rourke requested permission to address the council. There was hesitation. It was granted. He stood under the same stage lights where he once consolidated power through fear. He spoke plainly. No rhetoric. He described the moment he decided to restrict water to force compliance. He described the first time someone died because of that decision. He did not ask for forgiveness. He said he wanted his failure documented so no one else would repeat it under the illusion of necessity. The council clerk wrote every word down. Afterward, he returned to his seat among the labor teams. No one applauded. No one attacked him. Accountability recorded. The regional backbone is partially operational now. Messages can move across 4 states within a day. It's not seamless. Static interrupts. Weather interferes. But it holds. We received word this morning that a former university lab has been converted into a mechanical engineering cooperative. They're fabricating replacement turbine blades from salvaged alloys. They've requested blueprints of our hydro modifications. We sent them. A coastal enclave reported reestablishing a small-scale shipyard using sail power exclusively. No diesel. No reliance on centralized fuel supply. They're planning to move goods along the shoreline where roads remain unreliable. This is how infrastructure returns. Not as a monolith, as a mosaic. Children now attend school in 2 shifts powered by scheduled current. They learn mathematics by calculating load tolerances and crop ratios. They learn history not from textbooks but from oral accounts recorded in ledgers. They know about the Flash. They know about the silence. They know about the warlord. They know about the vote not to execute him. They are being taught that civilization is a practice, not a guarantee. Medical outcomes continue to improve. We have a functioning sterilization cycle. We have refrigeration stable enough for critical medications. We have traveling nurses linking enclaves with consistent care standards. We still lose people, but fewer. The plaza is no longer a place of fear. It's a market twice a week. Grain for tools, tools for cloth, cloth for preserved vegetables. No currency, just negotiation and record-keeping. I walked past the river tonight as the turbines spun under steady current. The sound is constant now, not triumphant, just present. I tried to remember the world before the flash. Air travel, instant communication, global supply chains humming invisibly beneath daily life. We may reach pieces of that again someday, but not soon, not completely, and maybe that's not entirely a loss. We are building redundancies into everything. Multiple water sources, distributed power, rotating leadership, open ledgers, children trained in maintenance before ambition. We understand fragility now. We understand that a single coordinated strike can erase decades of convenience. But it cannot erase cooperation once people choose it. If you're listening from somewhere beyond our corridor, know this: there is no full return waiting on the horizon. There is work. There is compromise. There is grief that doesn't vanish. And there is a stubborn, grounded hope that grows only after you've buried illusions. This transmitter has carried us from the flash to this moment. From silence to coordination. From coercion to charter. It won't last forever. Nothing does. But the network behind it will. Humanity survived. Changed. Humbled. More deliberate. We are not the civilization we were. We are the one we're willing to maintain. I'm going to power down for the evening block and conserve the tubes. If you're out there, keep your systems small enough to understand and strong enough to share. Guard your water. Protect your medics. Rotate your leaders. Teach your children the cost of forgetting. This is Caspian Holt. Still broadcasting. Still steady. And for the first time since the sky went white, planning beyond tomorrow.